Welcome back to the Minds in Motion podcast. I'm your host, Charles Fatumbi, and today we're going to be talking about the business behind music catalogs. So earlier this year, I came across the news that HarbourView Equity Partners, an alternative investment firm, had entered into a deal to partner and acquire select assets from the estate of the legendary Quincy Jones, the multi-hyphenate music producer and creative entrepreneur behind major projects like Michael Jackson's catalog, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, The Color Purple, and so much more. Naturally, my curiosity kicked in, and I wanted to understand what it looks like when a catalog of this magnitude changes hands from a business perspective. That led me to today's guest, Cynthia Katz, who is a partner at Fox Rothschild, one of the top law firms, and one of Billboard's top music lawyers, whose firm represented HarbourView on this very deal. In this conversation, Cynthia breaks down how catalog deals actually work, from due diligence to valuation. And we use the Quincy Jones deal as a case study to understand how music has become a legitimate asset class. Whether you're an aspiring attorney, a music and entertainment professional, or simply someone fascinated by how culture and capital intersect, this episode is definitely one that you want to listen into. So let's jump right in. I always like to start off these conversations by learning more about the guests that we're bringing on. Tell us a little bit about your background and upbringing and what led you into this career path.
Sure. So, actually, when I was younger, I thought I would be anything but a lawyer, and I tried out a lot of different things along the way. But my father and other members of my family had worked in the music industry, and then others had been lawyers, and so it was all kind of around both law and music as examples for potential career paths were things that I saw. One of the first internships that I had. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania and a dual degree with Wharton Business School as an undergrad. And one of the first internships that I had was at EMI in their business affairs department and then later legal. But I was like, this is the place to be. This is amazing. It was just super fun, and you really got to see all of the talent, the creativity. Where all of your work, whether it be spreadsheets or contracts or document, non-glamorous stuff, and then getting to see how it actually translates into the real world and creative output, which is kind of shapes culture and makes the world go round. So putting those together was like, okay, this is why it's worth it. This is the purpose. So I love that. And I was, oh, maybe I do want to work in music, but also I was around for the financial collapse of 2008 and the sort of coming of Napster and before what felt like the death of the music industry when a lot of people were getting laid off. And so it was sort of, okay, I need a skill set. I need that is not just tied to one industry that has a little bit more of a safety net. And figured just a general corporate background would be a good thing to have, business. And whatever you do, the business is part of it. I decided to also get a law degree and try to, be in legal affairs and work at a label. And that's kind of what I thought I would do. But the music industry was rapidly changing and in bad economic conditions around, when the internet really came to be and all the piracy that was going on. And I sort of pivoted for a while. And then as my career grew, I started, wanting to represent larger companies and, public companies and found my way to the M&A department. And just did a lot of M&A work for everything from semiconductor manufacturers to alcohol beverage distributors, whatever it might be, working on my, corporate and M&A skills. And I really did enjoy the work, and I actually thought I would stay there for a while. And then I met my husband, who at the time he worked for Sony Music in artist development for decades and Def Jam. And so everybody was with me said, no, you need to get back into music. That is where life is just going to be more interesting, really. And I think he thought it would be better hours too, although spoiler alert, it is not better hours. So then I transitioned and I kind of found a space as the corporate partner and music boutique firm doing all of the corporate work for artists and writers where a lot of successful talent, they have a business, they have a company, they have other projects that they're involved in, was a lot of alcohol or cannabis or, other branding type opportunities that they might be involved with. And then representing, labels and publishers. There's always M&A work there as well. Different divisions, different labels, buying and selling different assets and properties. And it was kind of around this time that, the sort of catalog boom industry just was getting started. It's now in some ways overtaken the industry, and as almost what it's all about is catalog and IP assets, and technology and infrastructure, as opposed to frontline A&R and marketing. The focus has changed a little bit in terms of what labels and publishers are concentrating on. But it just kind of was the beginning of that, because with streaming growing so much and the data that we had, the emerging markets also having more access to music consumption, and everything becoming more global, and Wall Street sort of waking up to the value in IP assets. It just exploded. So all of it kind of coalesced into a thriving market for this. And I kind of made that my specialty, because it is sort of the marriage between music and law and business, and not too many people do both. I had then, spent some years, representing talent and doing, producer agreements and co-publishing agreements, recording agreements, and really working with talent. And also, you know, some years working with corporations and doing, M&A. So putting them together was kind of that's the skill sets you need to make these deals. And so that sort of became my specialty. And then it just exploded so much that it, took 85 to 90% of my time. But I've really built a strong practice in this specialty. And I still do all of the other things, representing talent, just representing labels, publishers, standard music transactions. But buying and selling of IP rights, and then companies involved in music technology has really, I think, where the future is, and where my practice really has centered.
I don't know if it would be a coincidence after meeting your husband that led you back into music, or if this was kind of like a strategic play. But I am curious, do you feel like that M&A experience that you got working across consumer products and various industries really prepared you to jump back in and have this wider context on how to do deals within the music industry?
For sure. So the deals that we do in the music industry are a little bit different. Sometimes we joke that there's music M&A and regular M&A, because the norms, the industry jargon, ways of doing things. I mean, there are unique things that are handled a little bit differently than they are in some other industries. And the music industry is also particularly relationship heavy. So sometimes just straight M&A practitioners feel kind of out of the water if you don't have any music experience. But at the same time, I've seen it. Music lawyers who are just music lawyers, and they try to do these deals and they don't have the M&A chops. They're a little bit, they don't know what they're doing. You need both skill sets to really do it. So I'm very grateful. And I think I've been able to thrive in my practice exactly because of that, because I have the other skill sets. It's an interdisciplinary practice. I do think it's a marriage of two different backgrounds.
Some listeners may be looking to enter into law school, or they're currently in law school. And, I know in the first year, there's the doctrinals that you kind of learn the basics and the fundamentals of, but eventually you can start to curate your law school experience. So did you have that intention or goal in mind while you were in law school? And what advice would you give for someone in that position now?
So I will say I did not have a master plan. There was no, they always say you make plans and life laughs at you anyway. But I really didn't have, I mean, all I knew was, to be honest, was that I wanted to work hard and I wanted to be successful and I wanted to have purpose. And I did not know what any of that meant. So it was just like, okay, be the top of your class in high school. That was step one. And then it was, okay, go to an Ivy League school if you can. Step two. And then it was like, okay, Wharton is the best business school that there is. If you can get in, take it. And then it was, okay, if you can get a job in an industry that you think is interesting, but also just take the best opportunity that comes to you at the time. I mean, I played around too. I always loved science. I took a lot of pre-med. I thought about investment banking, in Wharton in particular, you have a lot of, at that time, it was like Lehman Brothers and Goldman Sachs and Bear Stearns. For me too, I thought about possibly what places were going to be women friendly, and which I felt might be too much of a boys club kind of thing. But I kind of was just going with the flow. And then the next sort of step was where I felt it felt like the sky was falling when they were like, the economy is crashing and there's no jobs. And so I was like, okay, let's just get another degree and we'll get more skills and we'll figure it out. And I was fortunate, I guess, enough because I had done very well in school. I got a lot of scholarships and things like that. Um, and then you're correct, in law school in year one, you don't really get any choices. You have to take all of the fundamentals. But I think something that's also helpful is taking information in, processing it quickly, and making a decisive decision. And learning how to do that with confidence and efficiency and speed is just a skill. So law school really helps you with that. Just take in a lot of information, process it very quickly, be confident in your decision. What is the conclusion about my action steps in terms of what am I doing with the information that I've collected. So that is kind of what you focus on, really, is like how to think, how to analyze the information that you're receiving. I think as your brain too is, most people are I think under, I mean, not everybody, but most people are under 25 or under 26. And when they're um, going into law school, I think your frontal lobe is still like developing. And so that is just really helpful there. And then by your second and third year, you're allowed to make some more choices. I started gearing towards more, two things also, because I didn't have a master plan, but I felt diversification was, so I said, let's do a bunch of IP, because IP is key to media, entertainment, arts, culture, that kind of stuff. Um, and also just with the Morton background, I felt that's where I was going to have a lot of connections, and coming from an entrepreneurial type mindset, maybe I'm going to build businesses or help other people build businesses. That's the advice, that life is about adapting, and the more skills that you have, the better you can adapt.
So, talk a little bit about what led you to Fox Rothschild and then how you kind of worked your way up within the company, and then a little bit about what you do now on a day to day basis.
So after I was working in corporate for a number of years, and my husband had suggested that I get back into music, I started looking at boutique music firms. A lot of music is done by boutique firms because of the flexibility that they have on fees, as opposed to AM Law 100 are expensive, and you have a lot of up and coming talent not being represented by the top firms. So they end up with a lot of boutique firms, and then they're very prominent ones, that specialize in this. So I said, let me find one, but let me find one that has a corporate department too, because I didn't want to start, at the ground floor. I wanted, to come in with something I had to offer and not just, relearn. So I found a boutique firm that had an opening for a corporate attorney. And I said, I'll do all of the corporate work. I'll handle all of that. But at the same time, which I won't bill for, I would like to relearn, get back up to speed on, general music transactions and talent representation. So while I was contributing by handling the corporate deals, I was relearning the music stuff at the same time. And then I rose up at that firm, be partner fairly quickly. And then we had myself and the other partners there, we were growing the firm and it was doing really well. And, we were running that for a number of years. And then one of my partners decided that he wanted to move to a bigger platform where we could bring in other things like full bankruptcy department and a full family law department and full, because all of your clients, one, they are people too, and they have all kinds of other needs. A lot of, even when you're just doing corporate stuff for the music industry, okay, well, we're buying this and then we're getting a building over here and leasing this office space, and, and someone's getting divorced, and and just, and also having more people, more talent, more associates, more help, more, you can bring in more business. They want to level up, I guess I would say. So they suggested that we maybe move to an AM Law 100 firm. I had worked at Big Law before. I had liked it as well, not in the music space, but in the corporate space. And so I left with one of my partners. I thought it was a good move for the future. There are only in my opinion, a handful of big law firms that have impressive music practices. For various reasons. It's traditionally not been something that Big Law has been great at, but there are about 5 firms that have phenomenal spaces, and they're really the ones doing everything. There were only really like 5 at the most to choose from, where I felt, they had thriving practices that we could join. And for various reasons, we moved to Fox. And so myself and one of my other partners, we moved to Fox together to join their practice. And then obviously a little biased, but in my opinion, I think we are the absolute best at offering both worlds. We are closing in on an AM 50 law firm. We are massive, every state, every practice area, every jurisdiction. There's nothing that we can't do, and fast and efficient and all that. But at the same time, particularly with the entertainment department, everyone has come from either in-house or from a boutique background. We have a little bit of a more flexible, softer approach. We can work with our clients however we want, from a fee perspective as and a timing perspective. And it's kind of the best of both worlds. So I think it's important because it helps you have perspective on the space. And it also keeps it interesting to represent small up and coming songwriters and $1 billion private equity firms, major labels, and 2-person startup, indie publishers. Like, I want to see all of the sides. I want to see someone who's, has a new, tech platform for the music industry that they're trying to do a friends and family safe round. And I want to do a growth fund for Universal Music that's investing in, buying massive AI companies. So we have a lot of flexibility and a lot of, ability
Yeah.
to, meet the clients where they are. Yeah, which I really enjoy. But yeah, I think every time you pivot a little bit, steps back to take steps forward.
Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely fair. And I think a lot of people maybe lose sight of that because they see upward mobility as just this linear path up and to the right. But you may have to take some step backs, especially if it's a slight career pivot. So I'm glad you touched on that. The next phase of this interview, think of it as like A to Z or like a crash course, because there's some listeners who may not know the intricacies of deal acquisition and IP, especially as it relates to music. And I think one thing that may be helpful is to approach it as like a case study with obviously this big news of Quincy Jones, his music assets being acquired. And just for context, for people who don't know, Quincy Jones is one of one. This man is a composer, an arranger, conductor, producer, philanthropist, entrepreneur who really shaped culture across a lot of experiences that we know today, such as the Michael Jackson 3 albums, Off the Wall, Thriller, and Bad. He also scored Color Purple, the film, executive producer for The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, co-founded Vibe magazine. He also arranged and conducted the recording of We Are the World, 28 Grammys under his belt, and even had compositions sampled by Kanye, Tupac, Ludacris, and much, much more. And so the opportunity to represent the firm that would ultimately acquire his catalog, or I guess some of it, we'll kind of get into that, what the nuances are behind that. That's a big, big deal. And so I would love to just understand, for someone who's never been on that side of the deal, what is it like to work on a transaction like this?
Sure. So, on the one sense, this is exactly what we do, buying and selling these types of rights. In the other sense, this is probably the most diverse and most valuable and culturally important set of assets that probably have come to market, to date. I mean, arguably, and it is, like you say, so he has interests in all of these things, whether they are back end syndication, royalties, producer royalties, owning parts of publishing, owning parts of masters, owning parts of companies that are in joint ventures with other distributors that, earn money on different things, the name, image, likeness, brand. I mean, all different types of rights and economic participations involved here. So it's certainly very complex. And something that's unique about entertainment assets too is, you have the original creator, but there's a long chain of people who are actually administering or distributing or ultimately controlling these rights. And in his case, also because he was deceased, you have the whole family and the estate as well. And, that, like I said, the different studios, and then there are various companies and joint ventures and production. So you in all of these deals, diligence is really key to the whole deal. That is what takes months of work, is establishing proper chain of title from inception of creation through, ultimate exploitation, and thinking through future exploitation as well. And then who are all.
So real quick, does that mean like who own all those assets that you just listed? Who owns what at the original creation of that asset?
So all the way along the line, when something, from the moment it's created until 50 years in the future, who is going to
Got it.
own all of the rights and every single bundle of rights associated with exploitation, and who's going to control it. And sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different, and where does all the paperwork go in terms of when was this licensed, when was this sold, when was this, exclusive or non-exclusive, who is collecting the money, who's paying who, where it's all going, so you have to follow all the money and you have to follow all the paperwork. And there's a lot of people and entities along the way, and things move years, over years. And okay, so it was under contract here, and then the asset moved over here, and then so and so, and it's usually a combination of various different types of contractual arrangements, licensing, purchasing, assignments, various things that are happening. And then, outside of the contracts, you also have recommendations that, copyright office and trademark, office, and just making sure all of the paperwork and all of the chain of title, and everything has been looked at. And then along the way, all different types of groups, are going to have different consent rights. Okay, so this belonged here for 5 years, and then it reverted here, and then so-and-so did it here, but they had consent to this. They had consent, making sure everybody signed off on everything that they had to sign off on, making sure nobody has any claims, there's no encumbrances, there's nothing that ultimately with your client that somebody's going to come out and make a claim, that you're not going to get sued from everything, that everybody who should be getting paid is getting paid, that everybody who contributed to the creation, the development, the distribution, the exploitation, that everybody, involved. And certainly with a catalog like this, and decades and decades, it's a lot of people and a lot of companies that everybody is on board with what is happening, and everybody is getting paid, has gotten paid, will get paid what they need to get paid, so that there's no lawsuits. And then, once you've sort of done your diligence, and that includes taxes, making sure every tax was paid everywhere that tax needs to be paid. And then once you've sort of established all of the diligence, that there are no encumbrances, and that we understand how the assets have moved, each and every one has moved from date of creation, and who all the collaborators were, and, everything from other producers and featured artists and mixers and performers, and everyone who was involved. Has everything's been cleared, and everything is looked into, and we're all good. We're negotiating the actual deal terms, because before we do this diligence work, which is very time consuming and intense, we actually had one of my partners went to Quincy's house, and which is interesting because a lot of this stuff, that anything that's, pre 2000, really, a lot of it only exists in paper, during boxes in Iron Mountain, in storage, in Quincy's cabinet, storage shed in the back of his house. It's much different. We didn't have everything as a digital record that you can just email around. So, we had a lot of calls to Warner Brother and Universal, to go check your archives, go here, go there, and tracking down physical items. But a lot of really amazing memorabilia from, song sheets with people signing off, original signatures on them, and old photos from in the studio, and, on set. It's really amazing stuff. But you have to go through everything. And then once that, is all sorted, it's business terms and legal terms that, have to get negotiated and get everyone to sign off. And then, there's, lots of records that have to be created too, so that the next time this switches hands, all of the paperwork is done. And then there's the sort of fun ongoing stuff. One of the reasons that people buy assets like this, and in particular, my client, HarbourView Equity Partners, who is the buyer here, which is like my family. Love them, an amazing group of people, is to be good stewards of legacy, and to help, increase the value for their investors. I mean, that's the other part of it. I think they would say, stewards of capital, stewards of culture. at the same time. So what are we doing with the catalog, and what are we doing with the catalog in partnership with the family so that they're comfortable, and how are we making it more valuable? What opportunities, what can we do? So that's a collaborative effort from all the stakeholders as well, including the majors and the studio, everybody who still has involvement. And how are we doing it in a way that increases the value, that makes it make more money while preserving the legacy in the way that the family wants it preserved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so working on that, and there's a lot of unsexy administrative work that happens there, letters of direction, filings, and also, like a lot of post-close work that happens as well. And some that take a year or more to work on with many, many, many attorneys. I mean, and some of the more simple ones, can get done in like 30 days, but this certainly was a big one and a complicated one. And there's also always some urgency too, because when you model out purchase prices and you create valuations, they're tied to earnings in specific periods, and you set dates, and things can get stale and people can get deal fatigue. And, it's hard to explain, someone thinks I made a deal. Hey, you're going to pay me, just whatever dollar amount. And this is what I'm going to give you. And we shook hands on it. The idea that we're, months later and what's going on. And a lot of it is lawyers talking to lawyers, and you have some people not in the weeds on it all day. And they're always, why are we not closed? Why are we not closed?
Mhm.
So there's always pressure to move fast and then also not miss anything at the same
Yeah.
time. But really interesting and really, really rewarding when we can get it done.
And I was going to say, so you really gave some great insight on the due diligence process, and then moving into like the valuation, because someone is eventually going to buy these assets, which is HarbourView in this case, for a non-tangible asset such as music or songwriting credit or syndication and all these different things. In other asset classes, you take the future, you know, earnings and discounting it back to present. Is that a similar process that you're doing, or how does that valuation process work for music?
So it's not as simple as just a straight, discounted cash flow analysis or a multiple of earnings. I mean, those are oversimplifications. Each buyer has and sometimes sellers who employ valuation firms. There are about 2 to 3 firms that specialize in entertainment IP valuation: Citron, Cooperman, Virtu, and the new one called Red Brick that do this work. FTI used to do it, and then Virtu spun out of that. But and then various funds and other buyers have their own in-house finance teams that have built proprietary valuation software and methods. But ultimately, all of the earnings data goes into systems that it's all analyzed, and different types of assets have different decay curves, different forecasts, different, in a sense, various different multiples applied at different points. There are certain earnings that are disregarded, that are one time, license payments or that, so that you can get, ultimately the idea is to predict a steady future income flow out of the different assets. And then there's various models that, have potential uplifts or downlet, and model out different scenarios that could happen, and taking into account things like, legislative changes and copyright terminations. Something that plays a lot into all of this is termination rights under sections 304 and 203 of the Copyright Act, where creators potentially have the ability to take some of their rights back if they previously sold them, things like that, which obviously you could, essentially lose assets. And there's always, litigation risk and various things. So modeling out, putting all of the variables into these proprietary models and coming out with, forecasts and predictions and then, discounting it back is essentially how it works. I mean, at a very crude, level, you could always then back into a multiple in a way and say, okay, well, this is the purchase price that I got at. What were the average earnings over a certain base period, and do the math. And I don't do the valuation work. That's usually a financial thing. But what my understanding from my clients, both sell side and buy side, is that nobody just takes earnings these days and uses a multiple. That's not how it's done. It's a more complicated predictive model. And of course, everybody has we have our own proprietary way of doing it. But ultimately, the goal is, yes, to take the earnings from every single song or royalty stream, content asset producing the income, and analyze each one. And because they're different also, how a different genre, how depending on the age of the asset, depending on the genre, depending on how whether it's very sync heavy or whether it's very live performance heavy, or where the income is coming from will depend how it's predicted to grow and decay or differently, and what different other things that could happen in the world
Yeah.
that could affect it. So each one's model is slightly different, and then all kind of put together. And you usually focus obviously on top earners in most of these deals, where you come to a subset of the assets that are the most valuable that you really look at, and then analyze down. I mean, and in a case like this, where you have thousands and thousands of songs and other assets, you really concentrate on the top earners. But then there are some catalogs that you might look at that it's really one song driving the whole thing. If you've got one, I don't know. Or, like I said, if you were, Mariah Carey's like Christmas song, or, something that's like big and iconic. I just sold something from one iconic song that we all know from our childhood, that song alone is it, so here it was there were many assets that were highly valuable. Fresh
Yeah.
Prince is, yeah, and there've been spin-offs, and there've been, I think they're doing new iterations coming out, and obviously, we also, Mad TV and The Color Purple, and obviously Michael Jackson, and like you said earlier, even to Tupac and Kanye. So there's real value across numerous assets in this category.
Yeah. And another thing that I found interesting was because his career and his assets span many decades, the tracking and the administrative work and keeping things up to record may obviously change over time. And so in the process of you tying up those loose ends, making sure that things were registered, that all the metadata was tagged and the rights were properly accounted for, does that whole process actually boost the value of the overall catalog and the asset, similar to if you were selling a home and before you make that transaction, you're going to do an inspection and make sure there's no leaks, there's no mold growing in the back, and maybe if you added a deck to your backyard, that then boosts up the asset value. So does that process that you guys went through inherently also boost up the value similar to another asset class?
Yes, for sure. Because at the end of the day, something is worth what someone's willing to pay for it. I mean, and not always, but oftentimes there's bidding wars that happen. There are when you're buying and selling these assets, you go to market and you get various offers. And um, if you're on the sell side, well, I always say you have to get your house in order before you can sell it, because uh, it, if it you know if people that there are issues that are uncovered in diligence, deals fall apart all the time, purchase prices come down, and then word gets out, and then value goes down. Same thing, like you had a house that's been on the market for a long time, or you hear somebody, so so people are not going to buy things, and deals are going to fall apart, and you're going to incur legal fees and administrative costs and everything. If things are not cleaned up and ready, in a good place when you go to sell. So you need to do that work as a seller beforehand. And then to the extent that it's done by the buyer, which sometimes the buyer will do if it's something they really want, as part of their purchase process. That's always a negotiation dance too. That depends on leverage when we are in the deal and we are uncovering issues. Who is doing the work to fix them, seller or buyer? I mean, we would like to say it should all be on the seller to deliver something that is clean and perfect, but oftentimes sellers come to you with a little bit of a mess, and then it's like anything else. It's, like who has the leverage here? If there's two houses on the market in the neighborhood that you want, do you buy a fixer upper and work on it, or do you say, no, thank you, I'm moving on to something else? But uh um you know that work inevitably makes it easier to transfer. And then here in particular, even if nobody's looking to resell, I mean, these are very, very expensive assets, I will say. So, and financing is very complicated. There is credit facilities, there is securitization, ABS transaction, a lot of, you know, putting the financing together. You have a lot of people who have to sign off on it. The money is not coming from Elon Musk's bank account, one person with billions of dollars. So the more people who are putting money in the pot to help finance these transactions, and the more sophisticated those people become as they do more and more of these deals, the more lawyers and bankers asking questions, checking under the hood, knowing what's going on. So to even be in a position to be able to ultimately close on assets like this, they're going to have to be cleaned up. And that, yeah, inevitably, increases the value, makes it easier to refinance, to move around, to do other things that you can do post close as well, like securitization that I mentioned, more money. Where there are a lot of really interesting financing vehicles that are coming into play to help finance the purchase, sale, and repackaging of these assets. That's another thing that, they get more valuable because you also can buy them and then combine them with other assets and, sort of mix them up, and the added diversification increases the value all the time. But in order to do that, in order to be able to take assets and mix them up and move them around or whatever, they've got to be clean in a sense.
Switching gears to like more broader picture of music as a asset class, you have these basket of rights, in these deals that have gone far beyond just traditional publishing or masters recordings, and now it's artist royalties or producer royalties, and even like name, image, and likeness. How do you even start to value those types of things? And then two, what do you feel like is driving this expansion to where it's not just about publishing and masters like it once was?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, and so it started back in the day. The only thing people wanted was publishing copyrights. I mean, that was it. And then, now it has expanded. So certainly to everything, like you say, certainly, the more digital that we get, and the better data that we have about the more avenues for monetization of different assets, and the more, so one that you see more opportunities and more things, like, for example, like AI is also, while it is somewhat of a threat, it is a massive opportunity and gives us a lot more monetization opportunities with name, image, likeness, including voice, signature, face, more branding opportunities that come with technology, and all different ways in which created cool things like the ABBA experience or the Bob Marley, or just different things that we can do with technology that are different ways to make money using these assets. Two is just there's more demand than there is supply as well. So everybody's looking for the next new thing, or, what can we do? And that's sparked interest. I mean, and then, like I said, there are different rights holders who administer various parts of these things along the way. And they started out kind of obstructionist to the market, as is often the case. And now they've sort of warmed up and want in on the market and want to be partners. So that's also open opportunities, for example, like neighboring rights, a lot of which goes through Sound Exchange. There was a point where they were not allowing talent to assign those income streams, and then now they have a whole set of processes and policies and procedures, and they're very equipped to help you, package those up and sell them off. So some of that is just, industry development and more making it market expansion and development. And some of it is better data and better monetization opportunities, but more, publicity around how valuable people are seeing, hey, this is really valuable here. What else can we do? How can I get involved?
Yeah.
And so that's just expanded it, and it's growing and it's growing. And luckily the opportunities are growing too. The ways in which these same assets can make more money and become more valuable is growing. So still much more reason to jump on board and get in if you can get in. It's a fantastic space to be in. I still think, from a purely monetary standpoint, the original proposition that these are, diversified, stable, and uncorrelated assets that should be attractive to investors and lenders and all of that still holds true. And then, just the added, as the culture changes and society changes with technological changes as well, the opportunities are growing. and it hopefully is getting more money into the pockets of the creators. And that's our ultimate goal too, to reward people who are doing cool things. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I was going to say this Quincy Jones deal is massive in size and scale, but I'm sure it tells a lot about where this whole movement of catalog acquisition is headed. But can you provide some clarity on, was this a full sale or was this more of a partial sale plus partnership and advisory for the estates?
Yeah, I mean, it is. And that is another thing. The way that these are evolving is that they are partnerships going forward, because ultimately it's a brand, and how we drive the brand forward affects both the catalog and the future. So I think these deals are evolving as well to be more holistic and look at the past and the future, and also provide creatives with some alternative avenues in terms of how they can look to find partners to help finance their future careers by investing in their back catalog and working together with creatives in a different way than they used to just have. Okay, your only options were sign with a label, like or sell something off, and you're on your own for the future. Everybody's getting creative in terms of what a future partnership might be, and marrying the past to the future is key, because it all affects the brand. So
Nice. Thank you, Cynthia. Like, I feel like I got a full crash course.
thank you so much. This was great. I'm looking really forward to the whole thing, and I'm excited to see it.